Hello and welcome to the CWWA Water and Wastewater Conference 2020. Now, don't look at your calendars, don't look at your phone. It's still 2020 as far as we're concerned for this national conference. We were supposed to be in Niagara Falls in November, but like the whole world, we've gone virtual. We're going to try this coming November, we're going to try Niagara Falls one more time. And we'll see if we can get down there. As well, if all goes well, we're going to try our window on Ottawa, here in Ottawa in June, in conjunction with Water Canada, the Canadian Water Summit. But this is the National Water Wastewater Conference of 2020. And like every national conference, we must have a toque. So I've got the 2020 version of the conference toque ready now. And this is going out to all of our, the prime contact at all of our members, getting it probably within about a week, and to all of our committee volunteers who I want to say thank you to. And we just want to make you smile, make you remember your membership in CWWA and remember how important it is to you, and keep you happy long enough to sign the check to renew your membership in CWWA. Your membership is more important than ever as we go through these crazy times. Having your support at the national level is very important. Great. So what's the theme of today's national conference? The theme today is Towards a Sustainable Utility. This is also the title of a major CWWA guidance document that we're hoping to release in the spring. We've been working on this for over a year. It began and has been spearheaded by our Utility Leadership Committee, which is led by our moderator today, Carl Bottomede. It quickly encompassed all of our committees, and all the chairs of each of our committees have been involved. But many of today's speakers are also members of that Utility Leadership Committee, or they're members or members of our board of directors. So it looks like I've just sort of pulled our own team together, but then I look and I go, wow. We've got amazing people on our board of directors that I can draw upon for this webinar today. So when we met as chairs and trying to pick a theme for this 2020 conference, the guidance document was the best theme automatically chosen, Towards a Sustainable Utility. So we had each of our committees gets to host one episode. They prepared one whole episode of this National Water and Wastewater series. It all wraps up with a closing plenary on February 24th when we get all the chairs to come together, and we're going to discuss what went on in all of these webinars and how it all fits together for a utility leader. So before I go any further, I'm going to explain this website real quick. It's called Big Marker. If you want to say hi to each other, there's a box just over here, and you can click on chat. You can talk to each other, send a message. You can say a message to everybody. If you want, go in there right now and say hello, everybody, and who you are. If you want to send a private message to just one person, you can do that. Beside that is a Q&A. If you click on the question and answer section, that's where you can put a question that we'll consider posting to our speakers today. So we're going to have the presentations, then Carl Bottomede as our chair. We'll look at those questions and bring those forward. So look at those. If we can answer them online, we'll try, but mostly that's where you post questions to the panel. Then beside that is polls. So wait right now. Carl will introduce the polls in a minute, and we're going to go through those one at a time before we get going. That's all you need to know about the website. Our sponsor today is Hatch, and it's just Hatch. They used to have this longer name, and then they're just Hatch. Just like when Beyonce was part of Destiny's Child, and then she went out on her own, and now she's even bigger and better, and it's just cool. That's how cool they are. They're just Hatch. But I want to thank them for their sponsorship, not just today, but every day for years. So many members of the Hatch team have been contributors to our committees and to our conference. including David, who will speak today, but none more so than Carl Bottomede, who's been my friend, helped form the Utility Leadership Committee and has been leading it since we began. So I really want to thank him for his support, and for Hatch for years of support of CWWA. So here to speak for Hatch is their Managing Director of Infrastructure and Water, David Mutombo. David has extensive leadership and extensive experience as a senior wastewater leader in the municipal and industrial sectors. His experience includes large and complex water, wastewater, linear infrastructure projects as the project manager, program manager, or project director. His experience includes initiating and driving large-scale multidisciplinary water and wastewater projects through to completion in functional, matrix, or projectized organizational structures. David is a PEng and a PMP with an MBA. He has an outstanding project management experience, having led multiple large projects over $100 million. And David's been a contributor personally to CWWA committees and events. So welcome, David, today.
Robert, thank you for the introduction. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Terrific.
Thank you. We are humbled to be the sponsor of this national conference. Thank you for the opportunity to sponsor anyways. The theme for the conference today, for this webinar, particularly utility leadership, I was reflecting on this theme and saying to myself, there couldn't be better time to talk about utility leadership than now. If you consider the crisis we all going through with COVID-19, and you connect that to utility leadership, utilities are playing a significant role in maintaining the quality of life to be as we know it, despite the COVID crisis we all going through. Everything can be shut off, but utilities have to run. We all still need that running water in our houses. We all still need to have wastewater systems operating to maintain the quality of life as we know it. So utility leadership couldn't have been a better theme in our views. And so I'm hoping we'll get a good discussion, good ideas on the importance of governance towards sustainable utilities now and in the future. Utilities are also going through a lot of discussions as to what to do with the digital transition that the whole world is going through right now. At Hatch, we embraced the digital transition years ago. We created Hatch Digital, and we expanded Hatch Digital into the water space. So I thought I would take this opportunity today to maybe inform the large Canadian water industry that part of that transition for us into the digital space, Hatch has acquired Adriamantis, a software solution company. Since November last year, Adriamantis is now part of Hatch. It gives us the opportunity to even grow our digital practice in the water space, come up with better solutions, and hopefully contribute even better to the ongoing discussion on utility leadership and the importance of governance through both the physical asset and the digital asset as we go forward. So we're very honored and humbled to be the sponsor. We look forward to continue working with CWWA on a future event. For me as the guest speaker, that's all I had to say for today. I wish everyone a wonderful conference, and I'm hoping we'll get good ideas and good discussions at the very end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, David. My name is Carl Bottomede, also from Hatch. And I think Robert and David have alluded to, have introduced me already. And I think that Hatch is very, very pleased, to be both part of the greater CWWA family, and a supporter of that, and also be a sponsor for this particular webinar. So as Rob mentioned, the theme of the webinar today, this webinar series, is towards a sustainable utility. The governance model under which a utility fulfills its mandate is obviously key to its ability towards becoming truly sustainable, and can either help or hinder its progress toward that objective. Now, I think we're all very familiar with the common municipal department model, in which the water system staff report ultimately to a CAO or a council. Very, very common. But today we're going to look at some different models currently being used across the country. A regional government, 2 municipal corporations, a cooperative, and a new coalition of First Nation communities. So each of our speakers, and I'll introduce them just before they make their presentations, will give us a brief 10-minute presentation on some of the key points about the governance model. We've asked each speaker to explain what authority they operate under, their corporate status, their governance model, their accountability to the public, and a bit about the customers they serve. As I mentioned, I'll introduce them prior to their presentation. But before we get going on that, I'd just like to draw your attention to the poll questions that you can see, and it's over in a window on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll see 4 little menus there: chat, QA, polls, handouts. And if you click on polls, there's 3 questions there that you can vote on. So please take a minute during the presentation, okay, to go through that, okay, and answer your questions, and then we'll be reporting at the end of the session. Okay, so also, as well as our speakers go through their presentations, please feel free to post any questions you may have, and we'll do our best to answer them at the webinar, at the end of the webinar. So having said that, let's get going with our distinguished speakers. And first up is Ted Robbins. Okay, and Ted is the General Manager of Integrated Water Services at the Capital Regional District of British Columbia. And he's got a large mandate. He's responsible for the delivery of 22 water and wastewater utility services. He's got over 25 years of experience in the water and wastewater engineering and operations sectors in both private and local government organizations. Ted is also currently the BC Director on the CWWA board and contributes there, and is also a member of the Canadian Water Network's Municipal Water Consortium Leadership Group. So without further ado, over to you, Ted.
Great. Thank you very much, Carl. And good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. It's morning here out in British Columbia. I'll dive right into our presentation here. Just a couple of cover shots there on the front slide. The top of this slide shows a nice panoramic view of our primary water supply reservoir that serves the Capital Regional District, which provides water to the Greater Victoria area. That's the Souk Lake Reservoir. And at the bottom, panoramic photo of our brand new tertiary wastewater treatment plant, which went into full operation just a couple of days before the end of 2020 in order to meet the federal regulations. So we're quite proud of that. And with that, I'll move to the next slide, please. So as Carl mentioned, I'm with the Capital Regional District, and just in terms of the governance discussion, it's important to understand a little bit about regional districts. They are quite unique to the country. Regional districts are across the province here. Capital Regional District is one of 27 regional districts across the province. The province established regional districts back in 1965 to help achieve regional economies of scale and flexible service arrangements in urban and rural areas, and essentially to provide services and a political and administrative framework across the region, as in the case with the Capital Regional District, but also to provide sub-regional and or intermunicipal and even local services in the unincorporated areas of the region. The powers for the regional district primarily fall under the Local Government Act and the Community Charter. Regional districts are governed by a board of directors, typically made up of municipal mayors in the case of small municipalities. And in larger municipalities, the mayor and councillors serve as directors on our board. And in the case of the unincorporated areas, there are elected electoral area directors who represent those unincorporated areas on our board. In the case of the CRD, we have a 24-member board that governs our organization. We have a number of committees and commissions that serve in various capacities under the board. And in some cases, particularly with our larger utility services, our utility commissions operate with a fair degree of delegated authority under the board's direction, which provides some real benefits in terms of the governance model and the effective service delivery for our utilities. We have actually, as Carl mentioned, 22 different utility services, water and wastewater. Today, I'm really going to highlight two of our larger utility services, being the regional water supply service and our core area wastewater service, which is, again, the subject of the treatment project that some of you may have heard about recently. Next slide, please. So just to give you some context, I'll start with the regional water supply service. This is the water supply service that serves the Greater Victoria area. It was established in 1997, but in fact, the service goes back almost 100 years. It was the Greater Victoria Water District up until 97, when the province stepped in and mandated that the regional district take over responsibility for regional water supply, as well as the largest distribution service across the region. The service was established by the province through an act and a regulation, which really sets out the mandate for the region to provide potable water supply for the region. Just to give you a sense of the size of the service, it serves about 370,000 people across 13 municipalities and one electoral area. The map on the slide there just gives you a schematic view of our large diameter transmission mains that extend across the region. And the colored areas to the left of that map are the large water supply areas that we operate as well. The CRD actually owns all of the catchment lands that serve the regional water supply service. That includes about 20,500 hectares of land. In terms of the system infrastructure, we have about 130 kilometers of transmission mains, up to just over 2 meters in diameter. We have primary and secondary disinfection, but we still operate with an unfiltered source, which may be something we're having to face in terms of looking at a filtered source in the coming years. And we have about 187 bulk connections across the supply system, which provide water to the various distribution systems across the region. I've got some rates there. We operate under a two-tier rate structure. At the regional level, we provide wholesale water to the distributors at just over 71 cents a cubic meter. And then the distributors sell that water to their customers at a retail rate. The CRD does operate the largest retail distribution system, and our current 2021 rate is just over $2.30 a cubic meter, just for some background information. Next slide, please. In terms of the governance model for our Regional Water Supply Commission, like I said, it is a commission of the CRD board. Again, there's a provincial regulation that sets out the commission membership and its powers. It does operate with a high degree of delegated authority. As I said, we have a 22-member commission, which is essentially based on the board representation, based on population of the different municipalities. The CRD board approves the commission's annual budget and any bylaws related to the service. But other than that, the commission essentially has full delegated authority to make all decisions within that operating budget, both on the operating and capital side, and all decisions, even with respect to land acquisition and other aspects of the operation. So quite unique. The commission and staff work directly with the stakeholders. I just have a graphic there that shows the number of stakeholders, of course, which those of you in the utility business will be familiar with. But in terms of the governance, the commission does get more directly involved with stakeholders than with some of our other advisory committees, which I'll speak about in a minute. In terms of benefits with this model, we certainly feel that this model allows the commission to really develop a strong understanding of the operation, the service financials, the capital program, for example. The commission is very engaged in the budget discussions around the capital program. And through this model, we feel there's a real strong political link to the stakeholders, and with that, strong accountability to the municipalities that the water supply system serves. Next slide. And then just moving to our largest wastewater service, just again to provide an overview of a slightly different governance model, but still working within the regional district framework. Our core area wastewater service is our largest wastewater service. Again, serves 7 municipalities across the Greater Victoria area and 2 First Nations reserves. In fact, wastewater was one of the very first services that the province mandate in terms of the regional district's authority, and that was in 1967. The authority was established under provincial supplementary letters patent. Following the mandate there, the regional district established service bylaws and continues to provide those service establishment bylaws for the various services around the region. We, through this service, provide wastewater conveyance and treatment for up to 320,000 people across the core area, as we refer to it. Again, the operating and capital budgets are funded through tax requisitions, so not rates, as with the water services. And with the upgraded system, we have about 120 kilometers of gravity and pressure mains. The new wastewater treatment plant, which, like I said, is just now in service, is a 108 megaliter per day plant, providing tertiary treatment. And with that, we have wet weather attenuation tanks while we sort out our I&I issues with the various municipalities. And along with the new treatment plant, a new residual treatment facility was constructed, which produces Class A biosolids. Next slide, please. In terms of the governance model for this service, again, slightly different from our Water Utility Commission model. This service operates with an advisory committee, which we call the Core Area Liquid Waste Management Committee. We have a number of standing committees like this that report up to the board that really serve in an advisory capacity. In this case, we have a 14-member committee, which is made up of elected representatives from across the 7 municipalities. The board, in this case, approves the annual budget, all agreements, all contracts, all bylaws associated with the service. Again, being advisory, this committee does not operate with the same degree of delegated authority that our Water Commission does. And we find with the standing committee or advisory committee model that the committee and the elected officials on the committee tend to get less involved in the operational oversight on the service. There's certainly a lot more political influence with the committee versus the commission. Issues tend to get quite political with the advisory committee. And the board often reconsiders or redebates committee recommendations that come up from the committee to the board if they tend to be contentious or more political, which doesn't necessarily add to the effectiveness of the service delivery. Next slide, please. And then just to wrap up, just wanted to highlight another model which has actually served us well with respect to the treatment project. If you've been following our project at all, of course, the province mandated wastewater treatment for the Greater Victoria area back in 2006. After 10 years of political debate, the province finally stepped in 2016 to mandate the establishment of a independent project board to deliver the project. It was very new for the CRD. The board was represented by 5 industry professionals, so not elected officials. We did have 1 board member, and then our CAO served on that 7-member board as well. But it turned out to be a very effective model in terms of delivering our $775 million treatment project, which, like I say, was constructed over the last 4 years and now in service. So I think I'm probably out of time there, Carl, so I'm going to wrap there, and I'd be happy to take any questions when we get to that point. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Ted. Very interesting. It sounds like I think we got 3 governance models there for the price of 1. So thanks very much. So our next speaker is George Chaperoux from Innisfil, Ontario. And Dr. Chaperoux currently sits on the board of directors for InPower Corporation, and also In-Services Utilities, Inc. So George is retired from InPower Corporation after being its CEO for 13 years. He also worked as a director of community services at the town of Innisfil for 4 years. So George is going to talk about the in-service utilities model. Over to you, George. George, I think you may be muted.
Thank you for the introduction, Carl. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Fine, thanks.
Terrific. So anyway, thank you for the opportunity. Basically, with In-Services, it's a municipal services corporation. So I'll go over this within the slide. So next slide, please. So Innisfil is a town about half an hour drive north of Toronto. It's a rural community, roughly same size as Mississauga. Mississauga has, say, 750,000 people. Innisfil has 40,000 people. So there's lots of room to growth there. Matter of fact, there is a lot of growth on the horizon. And it's on the shores of Lake Simcoe, in which case that's where the lake-based water comes from. Next slide, please. So the town of Innisfil has 3 corporations reporting directly to them. One is InPower, which provides the electricity to the area. It's governed by 5 directors. Enterprises, which is unregulated, so basically does the stuff that InPower can't do by virtue of regulation. It has a directorship of 2, and In-Services, which provides water and wastewater services, and that has a board of 5 individuals. Now, next, please. So InPower Corporation, it's a OBCA corporation established under the authority of the Electricity Act. Provides electricity to South Barrie and Innisfil, and currently has just over 19,000 customers. High growth in the area. 15 years, that 19,000 will be increased by 130%. So huge growth within this area. Next, please. Enterprises. So it's an OBCA corporation also established under the Electricity Act. So it does non-regulated services. So main business at this point in time is cell tower ownership. Council, a number of years ago, did not want cell towers prolificating throughout town, and they did not want them in haphazard locations. So they established the bylaw saying that cell towers had to be incorporated and installed in already utility properties. So we have these towers on substation properties. We have them at the lake system water filtration plant, the wastewater plant, a couple well sites. So basically where we have existing utility property, that's where council authorizes cell towers. So we own towers, lease space to cell phone providers for revenue. Next, please. So In-Services Utilities, that's our water wastewater company, and that was established under the authority of the Municipal Act. So it's a Municipal Services Corp. Provides the water and wastewater service in Innisfil, and we also sell water to our neighbors to the south, which is a town roughly the same size, same population, named Bradford, West Gwillimbury. Next, please. So In-Service Utilities, governed by a board of 5 individuals. We've got the mayor, town manager, 1 councillor, and 2 independent directors. So when we established this corporation, engineering, operations, and regulator employees, they were transferred to the new corporation. We had to have a new collective agreement negotiated. so that was accomplished. Both companies share one CEO. The InPower Corporation does the electricity delivery, also does the billing collecting, and that's shared with both because virtually the customers are the same. Human resources, legal, and finance is shared with the town of Innisfil, and the rates are approved by council. Next, please. So the benefits of having a municipal services corporation. So as with the case with InPower, debt financing is off the town's books. So in Ontario, municipal debt is limited by virtue of regulation in the Municipal Act. So by having this off the books, in services can borrow funds and doesn't impact the town's borrowing capabilities. So, for example, borrowing money from Infrastructure Ontario. Infrastructure Ontario requires a GSA, which is a note on the town books, but it does not encumber the town's borrowing capabilities. So the benefit is that we can borrow money. We don't have to wait for development charges through developers. We can do projects as needed in order to keep up with growth. Next, please. So just projected growth for in services, about 10,500 customers, relatively small, and we're looking at 90% increase in customers over the next 15 years. And that's mainly because many years ago, the provincial government established the Oak Ridges Moraine Act, which froze growth north of Toronto up to Holland Marsh. So growth has kind of leapfrogged the area. So Bradford and Innisfil have lots of growth on the horizon. So as far as capital works and meeting the customer growth, that's one of the main objectives of this corporation. Next, please. So as far as quality, as you know, in Ontario, we all have to deal with ministries, drinking water qualities, and accreditation and audits. So you know, we have to make sure everything we do is good quality, which is just like everybody else. Next slide, please. So the town to the south of us, we supply them with 65% of their water requirements, lake-based water. They have 2 wells to supplement, but basically we're supplying them with the majority of their water. And basically the agreement we established many years ago was that it's a cost-sharing exercise. So plant expansions, transmission lines, whatever, we're basically cost-sharing. We're sharing the transmission line, so it's a net benefit to both parties. Next, please. And as far as state sustainability goes, as we all know, water and wastewater processing uses a lot of electricity. The town of Innisfil is InPower's largest customer by virtue of the rec centers, water, wastewater, pumping stations, lots of electricity. So the drive towards sustainability involves us using less electricity, looking at our processes, motors, pumps are trying to use less, and also trying to fill up reservoirs during off-peak hours when electricity is available at less cost, and also there's less carbon sources used for the generation of that electricity. Some water companies are putting PV panels on their roofs in order to augment electricity use during high peak times to help with sustainability. So as far as total sustainability, long range plan for in-services, the answer is at this point, we're not in the position to displace the purchase of electricity or fossil fuels for a vehicle. So it's a slow process, but at this point, it's not on the horizon. So any questions, we can deal with them later. And Carl, thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, no, thank you very much, George, for an interesting presentation. Certainly a model which holds some attractions to probably a lot of people. So for our next speaker, we're now staying in Ontario, and our next speaker is Rodney Bouchard. Rodney is the General Manager of the Union Water Supply System, or UWSS for short, which is a municipal water utility in southwestern Ontario that is jointly owned by 4 municipalities. He's a professional geoscientist with over 25 years of public and private sector experience in the water supply, water resources, and environmental fields. His experience has been garnered through public and private sector employment both in the US and Canada, and he's currently the president of the CWWA, El Presidente, and is also on the CWN Municipal Consortium Leadership Group. So, thank you very much, Rodney. Over to you.
Thank you, Carl. I hope you can hear me.
Yep, loud and clear.
Perfect. Welcome, everybody. So, Union Water Supply System is, like Carl said, we are municipally owned utility about 45 minutes east of Windsor, Ontario, and we're based on Lake Erie. Before we move ahead, actually, next slide, please. Just a little picture of our plant on a nice sunny day. Next slide, please. Before we move ahead on discussing the governance, I got to provide a little bit of history on how we got to become what we are. It's a little bit of a unique thing because we are not actually a corporation. We're called what is a joint board of management, which is somewhat unique in Ontario. So basically the history is the Union Water Supply System, Union Water System was commissioned by the Ontario Water Resource Commission in the 50s. It was actually constructed in 1958, started and commissioned in 1960. And that was a commission of the Ontario government. And at that time, the idea was that the Ontario government was looking at creating these area water schemes where they thought it would be better to create these larger systems that could service a number of small towns and townships instead of having a number of small utilities everywhere. So by 1970, we had the system included 11 townships and towns. And the system was basically owned by various agencies of the government up until 2001. And that included Ontario Water Resource Commission, the Ministry of Environment, and at the end, Ontario Clean Water Agency. In mid-90s, the government of the day in Ontario decided that a couple of things were going to happen. One was that they felt there was too many municipalities in Ontario, so they were going to start amalgamating a bunch of municipalities together. And the second was that they didn't want to be in the ownership business anymore of water and wastewater utilities. So in tandem with the amalgamation of municipalities, they basically had passed an act, the Municipal Water and Sewer Transfer Act of 1997, where once the municipalities were amalgamated, any utility, water, wastewater utility that were owned by the province would be transferred to the municipalities that basically received those services. So it took a while to get that going in our area, but by 2001, there was a transfer order that was basically put together by the province of Ontario, where the utility Union Water System would be transferred from the province at the time owned and operated by the Ontario Clean Water Agency, and it would be transferred to the new four newly amalgamated municipalities of Lakeshore, Leamington, Kingsville, and Essex. Next slide, please. So the transfer order basically stipulated that the 4 municipalities would own the system as tenants in common. And the ownership would be based on the municipality's proportional consumption of the total water flows. And that started in 2001 based on water demands. But the last ownership interests were set in 2017. And you can see on the slide what those proportional ownership interests were. So Leamington, basically a little over 50%, Kingsville, a little over 40%, and Essex, about 7%, Lakeshore, a little over 3%. And this ownership is basically updated every 4 years. So we do a review of water demand or water consumption by the 4 municipalities, and that ownership interest is updated at that time. The board consisted, so the Transfer Act basically stipulated that the board would consist of appointees that would be appointed by each municipality. Every municipality, so each of the 4 municipalities would have 1 representative on the board, and then an additional representative for each 10% water consumption that they had. Next slide, please. So basically, what is Union Water Supply System? So what was transferred to the municipalities at that time So once the transfer occurred, basically the transfer order stipulated that the board, the joint board of management with the representatives of the 4 municipalities had full authority over the common system, as it's called. Although it was owned by the municipalities, it was the board that had control of the water system. So this system includes a low lift pumping plant on Lake Erie, 1 larger water treatment plant, so 125 megaliter capacity per day. And we have reservoirs, booster stations, 4 elevated towers. So each town has an elevated tower, basically, and but we control those. 140 kilometers of common transmission mains, and but the overall system includes over 900 kilometer of distribution mains, and the distribution side is controlled by the municipalities. We basically operate and take care of the transmission mains. There's about 75,000 residents within the service area, and there's over 2,800 acres of greenhouse that are currently operating in the service area. Now, in terms of growth, we anticipate that residential growth will be about 10 to 15% in the next 10 years. This has been identified the banana belt of Canada, I guess, and it's seems to be a nice retirement area for a lot of people from the GTA to come down. So growth has been in the last 5 years has been quite significant, and they project it to keep going. And on the greenhouse industry side, although there's 2,800 acres of greenhouse that we provide water to, there's actually 3,500 acres of greenhouse that are approved, and they're under construction right now. So the additional almost 1,000 acres, and there's projected to be at least another 1,000 acres in the next 10 years, if not more. So we have to meet that demand. Next slide. Next slide, please. So that's basically our service area. It encompasses, you could see almost over half, if not more, almost 3/4 of Essex County. It's a fairly large area, now over 900 square kilometers. And the little red dot there shows where my office is, where I'm sitting at right now. And it's in the administration part of the main water treatment plant. Next slide, please. So basically, as part of the transfer agreement, the transfer order basically stipulated that the board had full authority over the entire system. So we are basically arm's length from the municipal owners, and we have full authority to set wholesale water rates. So we have our 4 customers are the 4 municipalities, and they resell the water to their customers at retail rates. Our wholesale rate is a little over, it's 0.62, 62 cents per cubic meter, which is a little low, and but we've been increasing that over the years to help with our capital programming and our operational program. So we also have full authority over operations and capital planning. So we can, whatever needs to be done to upgrade the system, to expand, we have full authority over that. So basically, the way we work is we're almost fully sustainable or full cost recovery. Water rates are basically the only source of revenue that we have, wholesale water rates. We do have a little bit of revenue from leasing space for telecommunication antennas on our water towers and stuff, but that's less than, I would say, 0.5%. So we pay for everything through our wholesale water rates, and that's been working well for us. We have a very collaborative and forward-thinking board right now, and the 4 municipalities get along, so that's great, because when there's been a time in the past where some of the municipalities didn't get along, and that created some issues on the board. But since we do have authority, we don't have much, we call it interference, but the municipalities can't really dictate for us to do what we need to do. We have that authority to do that as needed. The one thing that we don't have is that we can't borrow money on our own, and we can't basically get grants on our own. So although we can stipulate, okay, we need to meet water demands based on your demand projections for the 4 municipalities, we have to build a new water tower, which we did a few years ago, or we have to, build a new reservoir, which we're looking at. So we can say that, okay, we have to do this. This needs to be done. we have to negotiate basically how we're going to borrow that money with the one or more of the municipalities that we provide water to. So that's one of the biggest shortcomings that we have. So everything that can be, projects that can be revenue funded goes very well. And we do have significant reserves because we do a lot of our capital upgrades and stuff through the reserves, and it's all funded through wholesale rates. But any larger projects, such as new reservoirs, which the one we're looking at right now is $35 million. And there's a couple of large upgrade projects that we're doing, including dissolved air flotation, and adding UV and advanced oxidation. So that's coming in the next couple of years. Those are significantly larger. We have basically, for as small of a utility as we are, we have a capital program for the next 10 years that's north of probably, I'd say, $70 million. So we have to find different ways to basically secure the funding for that. Next slide, please. So this comes to, although, we are arm's length and things work well, some of the big issues that we have is that we really don't have a legal status under the Municipal Act. So we were created under the Water and Sewage Transfer Act of 1997 through a transfer order that was put together by the Ministry of Environment of the day. So that's, we have full authority to hire people, contract, set rates, and basically secure whatever we need to do our work. We don't have legal authority under the Municipal Act, which makes it challenging for certain things. And also, it makes it definitely very challenging for obtaining debt funding because we can't do it on our own. And there's been some significant, grant programs that have gone through in the last few years that we haven't been able to apply directly. And that creates a challenge because usually the application periods are very short, and by the time you can get 4 councils together to approve the applying on our behalf, that grant period is usually closed by that time. So not a lot there. And there's also competing interests between what the municipalities want to do themselves and what we want to do as a utility. So those are some of the bigger challenges that we have. So one of the things that we decided is that we need to address those challenges because we need to be more sustainable in the future. So next slide, please. So we're proposing to restructure into a municipal service corporation under OREG 599. The same thing that basically George was talking about in the previous presentation. And that would basically, there would be 4 shareholders, the 4 municipalities that we have. We would transfer the assets, the common assets from those 4 municipalities and basically transfer it to the new corporation. Any debt that would be incurred in the future would be on the new corporation books and not on the municipal books. The initial structure would mimic what we have as a board, but it would also include provisions to include experts on the board. And it would provide us a legal standing under the Municipal Act. Next slide, please. So those are the benefits that I just talked about. We're hoping to, next slide, please. We're basically hoping to get that done in the near future. So the business case has been approved in principle by the 4 municipalities. All the incorporation documents have been put together and the supporting documents. The financial institutions have been consulted with our business advisors, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they basically the credit market is very interested in the new corporation and propose it, and it would fund us and provide credit to us. And one of the main issues that we want to address is what we call common asset water main. So when there's big problems out there, it's like, well, it's always a concern. It's like, well, do you own this or do we own it? Who controls this? Is it Union Water Supply System or is it one of the municipalities? So that's one of the big challenges we're looking to address through the corporation as well. And if everything goes well, we're hoping to go live before January 1st, 2022. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Rodney. It was very interesting, both in terms of the pros and cons of your existing governance model and where you plan to go next. Okay, and talking of next, we are now moving to the middle of Canada, and Greg Archibald will be the next presenter. And Greg's the CEO of the Pembina Valley Water Cooperative, which serves 14 municipalities in southern Manitoba. In his past life, Greg held senior manufacturing leadership roles in forestry and agriculture. He joined in 2016 the Red River Basin Commission Board Executive, which is an international organization which promotes joint water management of the Red River Basin, which obviously spans both into Canada and the US. Greg is the Manitoba Board Director for the CWWA, and also Secretary Treasurer of this organization for the past 3 years. So he's the money man. So over to you, Greg.
Thank you very much, Carl. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Just as we get going here, on the cover page, I'd like to point out two of our water sources. One is Stephenfield Lake, right in the middle there, and the other off to the side there is the Red River. And of course, there's one of our plants. So let's go ahead. Next slide, please. So our surface area, everything began with Pembina Valley Water Co-op back in the early 90s. There was a couple of issues. One, the Red River area was a drought-prone area at one point in time, very little flow in the Red River, and at the same time, there wasn't a good distribution system to move water around. So with that, the Pembina Valley Water Co-op was formed. Currently, we serve about 9,000 square kilometers today. We serve with domestic water, for industrial, for agriculture. Agriculture is kind of a unique thing in the prairies, and we supply two main reasons for ag. One, when the spraying for crops go on, that uses a high amount of water, and so we supply that area. And the other is just drinking water for the animals. We have in one rural municipality, we actually have 44 hog barns. 21 of those are connected to us. And in one case, one gentleman was telling me that he puts 30,000 hogs through his barn in 1 year. So you can see that we have a lot of thirsty animals there. So in addition to that, we have a population base of 70,000 people. So we supply water at their wholesale rate to 14 municipalities, to 3 private water cooperatives, and to 1 First Nations community. Next slide, please. So you can see in this overview that we have 3 water plants, one at Morris and one at Letellier, which are on the Red River, and then at Stephenfield Lake inland. We have a larger reservoir inland and a joint piping system of about 315 kilometers of main pipeline, and then many lines with the individual municipalities. We're not big. We're about 17 megaliters a day, up to about 25. Next slide, please. So we were established way back. We've been doing this for almost 30 years as of this June coming up. We're established as a not-for-profit corporation in Manitoba under the Cooperative Act, though not under the Municipal Act. And that gives us some flexibility and some good things, and I'm going to speak to that a little bit in a minute. So next slide, please. So we're owned by the 14 municipalities, and each of them at the start put up a $150 membership fee, but they don't actually contribute any money to the organization. So we have to find money other ways, which I'll speak to in a bit. The debt is divided up, though, so at the end of the year, if we have outstanding debt, it is divvied up and goes on the books of the individual municipalities on a percentage basis of water usage over the past year. So each of those 14 municipalities elects 1 member to my board of directors, and they have 1 vote. There's a high degree of delegation to me as the CEO to run and manage the corporation, and that's just an expectation. Next slide, please. So one of the uniquenesses is around our financial processes, and we really have made a long journey moving toward being really full self-sustaining with a full cost recovery. We're very close on that model. Things for maintenance, operations, capital upgrades, all really needs to come from water sales. It's a little bit complicated too, because any price increases have to be approved by the Public Utilities Board in Manitoba. Because we're not under the municipal side, we're not eligible for any gas tax or charges or anything like that. As a matter of fact, we finance by going directly to the banks. So currently we're using CIBC. We're using something pretty unique called Bankers Acceptance and Interest Rate Swaps, which gives us the ability to get a lower than normal loan rates. And the way it works is we actually close and open the account every month. So on a particular debt instrument, we will pay the interest off, we will close the account, we will open it back again at the end of the month. And because of the flexibility it gives the banks, they allow us to have a much lower rate. We can do it both on fixed and floating rates. And with some of the open rates now, it's pretty amazing the low amounts that we're having to pay on our opened rates. And that allows us to accelerate our debt repayment. Just to give you an idea of how close we are to being full self-sustaining. Over the last 28 years, from 1991 to 2019, we obtained about $6 million in government grants. And currently we have 23.6 projects on the docket, and there's about 3.89 commitment in government grants. So that's about going on $10 million over 30 years. Other than that, everything has to come from the water rates. And our current rates are about $2.05 a cubic meter, which is the wholesale rate to the municipalities. Next slide, please. So from a governance perspective, we're a little bit different in that we have two co-chairs. We have one on the east side of the valley and one on the west side of the valley. We have some of the standard things that other boards would have, our bylaws, our incorporations. We have what's called an authority matrix, which allows it to be very clear the authorities that are delegated to me as a CEO. And from someone that worked in the for-profit world, it looks an awful lot like the responsibilities that I had in the for-profit world. So it's quite an extensive delegation. Do have executive and audit committees that help work together. The big thing from a philosophical perspective is there's extremely good support to make the decisions that are best between the 14 municipalities for the water co-op, PVWC, and the whole valley. And something that helps us a lot is we have a 5-year capital plan, and we have a 20-year water forecasting modeling plan that looks like when we would need to spend money. As I mentioned, we're owned by 14 member municipalities, all the ways from towns to cities to RMs or rural municipalities. Next slide, please. So when it gets down to accountability, then how might we be held accountable by the various stakeholders? From a customer perspective, we have an annual membership survey that we send out to our customers, and they identify both any issues they might have, but also their future plans so that we can stay in lockstep with our customers. There's certainly direct communication if there's customer issues. The board members can bring up things at a board meeting if they want. And as the CEO, I spend quite a bit of time with local media, just making sure that we get our message out so we're understood by the customers. From a council perspective, it's a little bit different in that we're responsible in some ways to 14 councils through their representatives, but they've been extremely cooperative and working well with us. I do, as the CEO, visit a number of councils, so I have them on the docket just to go to make sure that that any issues they might have, and really their main issues are that we provide enough water to keep ahead of them with the economic growth and development. And this is a high growth area in southern Manitoba, so we want to really stay ahead of them with all our planning and making sure we're in a good place to be able to fund these improvements. And lastly, the other area of accountability is related to price setting rates. As I mentioned earlier, the Public Utility Board approves our rates in the province of Manitoba, and we do it a little bit differently. It's kind of a unique process because we ask for an approval in 5-year rate increase in a block. So a couple of years ago, we asked for an increase over 5 years, and you can see there were 10% first year, then 2, and then it came back as 0 to 2, 0 to 2 was what the PUB asked us to consider. So we're at 3 years down. And so this is a good thing in that it allows us to be able to set rates for the municipalities so they know what the retail rates would be for the next 5 years. It's sometimes challenging for us because we have to do a really good job of planning and forecast into the future to make sure that we have everything lined up properly to be able to afford to make the changes, whether they be regulatory or just expansion capacity issues or pure real life issues. So next slide, please. So just in concluding, our journey to sustainable utility is well under its way. We're doing a lot of things to make sure that we can pay our own way through full cost recovery. We're still getting some government support, but we're well on our way. Back to you, Carl.
Okay, thanks very much, Greg. Very interesting, and sounds like you say, you're on quite a way along the journey to full sustainability. So, our last but by no means least speaker is Carl Yates, or Carl Y, as we tend to refer to him, as distinguished from myself, Carl B. And very interesting in that Carl was appointed in June 2020 as the interim CEO for the Atlantic First Nations Water Authority, which was formed to provide water and wastewater services to First Nation communities in the Atlantic region. And that's going to be the subject of Carl's presentation today. Most of us know Carl, though, from his long tenure, with Halifax Water, where he served as general manager from 1994 to 2019. He then formed his own consulting company, Yates Water Management, to promote and support sustainable water management. And Carl represents the CWWA to the International Water Association and is now the chair of the Canadian Water Network as well. So looking forward to your presentation, Carl.
Thanks, Carl. We'll jump right in and hopefully wrap up here, and we'll get on to the good part where the audience will quiz us up. So next slide. I'm going to take a little bit of history. I'm not going to go all the way back, but key for the formation of our utility was an Auditor General report back in 2011 when, we'll use the phrase, he became Captain Obvious and said that things weren't in a good way within First Nation communities. From there was a national study done by Negan Burnside to look at the assessment of all the different First Nation water and wastewater systems, and they discovered certain things weren't in great shape. But also found that in Atlantic Canada, many of the communities did not meet the requirements of the guidelines for the Canadian drinking water quality. Next slide. So moving on, from there was a study done through the Dalhousie Centre for Water Resources Studies for the Atlantic Policy Congress of First Nation Chiefs Secretariats, and they looked at a possible structure to turn things around. And originally they focused on a public-private partnership model. And we're looking at the potential to form a not-for-profit corporation at that time through federal statute. Then after that, we all saw the national legislation that came through, the Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act, that further facilitated First Nation communities to form organizations to look after their systems. And that really was, I guess, a catalyst to really take a closer look at organizational structure for Atlantic Canada. So next slide. So again, Dalhousie was working for the Atlantic Policy Congress and put together a report looking at different governance models under this public-private partnership opportunity, and worked with many federal agencies to come up with a project charter for a clean water initiative by 2014. And we're really starting to get ready to really put things, on the rails to turn the ship around to ensure that First Nation communities will be well served and bring their standards up to national benchmarks. Next slide. Of course, what often happens is there's sometimes a regime change at the federal level, and of course that's when the Liberal government came into play, and there was a recasting of the project, and Dalhousie and INAC at the time and Atlantic Policy Congress got together again to look at how they might go about delivering a regional authority. One of the things that was starting to become clear is a lot of the First Nations actually were not keen on a public-private partnership model. Basically did not suit their traditional approaches of culture and knowledge development. And as a result, they asked for another study to look at corporate governance. Still said, okay, we'll take a look at P3, but what other possibilities are out there? Halifax Water and Accelerator got involved at that time through a request for proposals, and did work directly for the Atlantic Policy Congress and put together a report that said there's 4 possible models to consider. There was a recommendation to do one particular model. It was workshopped with all the chiefs, elders, water operators, and industry professionals, and in the end, a consensus came to bear to produce what's called the decentralized full service model. So next slide. So with that, the chiefs decided that they would actually form Atlantic First Nations Water Authority. So actually we were incorporated on July 18th, 2018 under the Federal Not-for-Profit Act. It is deemed to be a water authority for First Nations by First Nations. So this is unique in that it will own and operate and maintain water and wastewater systems. One thing the chiefs told us during the workshops, and we're very clear about, they did not want this to be a political organization. And for some of you that follow politics, both within First Nations and municipal organizations, you know sometimes that the thinking is perhaps a little too short term. And in some cases, even with First Nations political frameworks, some still actually get elected every 2 years. Many now are on a 4-year cycle, which is good, but there's still some actually here in Atlantic Canada and across the country that actually get elected every 2 years. You can appreciate sometimes that hampers long-term thinking. So it really is a technical organization focused on the provision of water and wastewater services for member communities within 2 First Nations groups. They are the Mi'kmaq and Wet'suwet'en. So the Mi'kmaq are predominantly around Nova Scotia, good part of New Brunswick and PEI, and Wet'suwet'en is in predominantly western New Brunswick, more interior. Next slide. So the board is to be comprised of up to 15 members. They can be 12 from First Nations directly and 3 technical experts, which can be First Nation if that's fortunate to find them, but it can also be non-First Nation. So right now we have 6 directors. Actually, I can give you breaking news. As of today, we have 7. So I'll even announce the 7th board director today. But currently we have Chief Wilbert Marshall as the chair, Chief Ross Purley as the vice chair, and I should name the communities where they're from. Chief Wilbert Marshall is from Bottletech in Cape Breton. Chief Ross Purley is from Tobic in New Brunswick. Chief Darlene Bernard is from Lennox Island in Prince Edward Island. Chief Aaron Sock is from Tobic Elsie Buktuk in New Brunswick. Chief Terry Paul is from Membertou, and Chief Terry Paul is the famous director that just announced the Clearwater deal, if you want to see where that name is familiar. And Chief Andrea Paul is from Pictou Landing. And this morning, we appointed Chief Leroy Denny from Eskasoni in Cape Breton. The board is to be supported by an active Elders Advisory Council to ensure traditional values and culture are incorporated into the operation. So that's very important, obviously, for a First Nation utility to remain true to its heritage and culture. Next slide. And I wanted to show you this beautiful storyboard that was developed during some of the workshops that we had with the elders and chiefs. And this actually storyboard tells the entire organizational structure for our utility. So we'll show you some of the obvious elements here. You can see in the canoe, we have the board of directors and the Elders Advisory Council alongside. So they're the foundation for the utility to ensure strong leadership. And above it, you'll see that lovely circle, the yellow circle with 4 quadrants. All those quadrants represent the 4 departments of the utility, which are operations, corporate services, engineering, and communications and outreach. Coming from that circle, you'll see little hubs with spokes coming from it. And that's very symbolic, of course, of our operational model, the hub and spoke model, which I'll refer to in a little while. And then over to the left, of course, is the geographic region right now that is represented by the First Nations that are participating. And you can see the wigwams represent the hub offices for each of the regions that we will serve. And in the center is a golden wigwam, which represents the headquarters. We were going to choose it somewhere, obviously in the middle of the Maritimes. And the mission statement you can see is floating nicely in the water below it. Clean and safe drinking water and wastewater for all Atlantic First Nations communities. Next slide. And here's a more boring graphic to look at, but nonetheless, this is what we see more traditionally. There's the owners at top, which represents the communities, which will have one member, one vote, and the board of directors that ultimately answer to the owners. We have our standard committees that you expect in our board of directors: audit and finance, our board executive, and environment, health, and safety committee. You see the elders advisory committee, and of course, as the CEO, I report directly into the board of directors, and the senior management team reports to me. So next slide. So I mentioned that the corporate structure is going to be a full service decentralized model. That was one of the four that we put in front of the chiefs and councillors and elders to consider. And it incorporates a hub and spoke model for operations for optimal service delivery and stronger community relationships. So currently there are 14 communities in New Brunswick, PEI, Nova Scotia that have signed band council resolutions to participate, and they represent approximately 60% of First Nations populations in Atlantic Canada, serving approximately 4,500 households and commercial establishments. Next slide. And here's the map that kind of shows you the different geographical areas. Each one of those we would consider to be a hub under our hub and spoke model. And there's a clustering which looks quite logical to most people. Within that oval, you'll basically be able to travel to any community from the kind of supervising First Nation community. Within 2 hours, you should be able to get to any other location in that there. So you can see the logical clustering, and you see different colors of stars. There's a blue star and a red star. The blue star represents communities that have a municipal type arrangement with a local municipality, which we will continue to encourage, and the red ones are standalone systems. Next slide. I'm not going to read you all that, but that's there for your taking. But what's important, this June, there was an announcement by Minister Mark Miller on a framework agreement that was signed between the Atlantic First Nations Water Authority and Indigenous Services Canada, which basically says we're going to work together over the next 2 years, such that at the end of it, this utility will be autonomous and in full operation by spring 2022, and we'll have a nation-to-nation relationship. And basically, we will no longer go through Indigenous services for decision-making. It will be directly nation-to-nation in the vision of self-determination and self-governance. Next slide. Key to this utility, of course, will be a regulatory framework. So that's always important with regard to governance. It is clear that we'll have regulatory oversight for drinking water and wastewater effluent quality. Environment Canada are the logical regulator for wastewater. They regulate everybody else across the country in terms of compliance with the wastewater system effluent regulations. So this utility will also come under that framework. There is no, of course, federal regulator, as we all know. In our Constitution, drinking water quality is under the umbrella of the provincial authorities. So that is something we're going to be working through to do that. But in the interim, we are going to take a different approach. We're going to take a more proactive approach to produce high quality water and wastewater, and that is through the adoption of water and sanitation safety plans, which are currently being developed by one of our partners, Dalhousie University. Next slide. And just quickly, why are we doing this? What's this all about in terms of governance for sustainability? Why choose this approach? And really, this is an opportunity to have consolidated funding for system management, operations, and capital upgrades to realize economies of scale. So this was previously actually highlighted in the book Watertight. Have you ever read that book, you folks, especially in Ontario? You understand that regionalization does make a lot of sense when you have a lot of smaller towns to come together. Capital upgrades will be based on long-term integrated resource plan. We're talking a 25-year horizon. The Water Authority will have some in-house resources, typical of a standalone utility, operations, engineering, finance, accounting, HR, IT, all those things you'd expect. And that helps build capacity within First Nation communities for careers. Decision-making will rest with the authority and not Indigenous Services Canada, and with one strong voice to negotiate directly with the federal government. Important that we can build capacity within First Nation communities through engagement with local contractors and trades. And as the owner of community water and wastewater systems, the utility will assume responsibility and liability for operations, maintenance, capital upgrades. Today, that liability rests with individual chiefs and councils. Next slide. And there we have it. We're finished. And what makes this somewhat challenging, of course, is we are actually on the bleeding edge, as this is the first regional utility to own, operate, and maintain water and wastewater utilities in First Nation communities in Canada. So with that, we'll turn it back to the other Carl.
Okay, very good. Thanks very much, Carl. Very interesting. And the next, sorry, I'm getting a bit of an echo here. Okay. So the next, I'm still having some audio issues here, but I can continue on. So 5 very interesting presentations, okay, and we'll get to questions now. I'm going to go to question here just to kick off, and I see there's just a couple of questions in the Q&A section, so if anybody wants to post some more, that would be fantastic. We'll get to those. And also as well, just a reminder about the polls. I see some quite a few people participated in that, okay, but I think it'd be nice to get a complete survey, okay, from those polls, so if you could take a minute to do those too. So I'm just going to start off with one question, okay, and to ask each of our 5 presenters just to spend a minute just talking about that. And the question is, giving our series theme towards a sustainable utility, can you just speak to some of the pros and cons of your particular governance model? What are some of the benefits, whether it be financial, flexibility, efficiency, and what are some of the challenges? So we'll just go in the order of the speakers. Okay, so that means that Ted, you're up first, if you could give us a minute on that.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Carl. A couple of the speakers noted the importance of a full cost recovery model, and that is a model that is supported by our regional water supply service and our commission. And I really believe, in terms of the sustainability of the service, having the commission, the elected officials, and the organization support a full cost recovery model is absolutely critical for the sustainability of the service. The commission model that I spoke of for a regional water supply service fully supports the full cost recovery model. And again, I think a lot of that is based on the commission's understanding of the service. They really do roll up their sleeves and understand the operating and capital aspects of the service. And with that, particularly on the capital side, support the full cost recovery model, particularly when it comes to investment in infrastructure, replacement and renewal of infrastructure, which of course is critical in terms of the sustainability of the service.
Okay, thanks. Okay, George, your thoughts? Okay, perhaps we'll skip over George for the moment. And Rodney.
So basically, the pros and cons. I mean, well, a couple of things is that we are somewhat arm's length from our municipal owners, which is good. We have full authority to do what we think is necessary, which works well. And we also are somewhat, meet almost, I would say, full cost recovery, because the only thing that we can use to support our operations and our utility is wholesale water rates. So in that terms, we are basically full cost recovery. On the sustainability side, one thing that's lacking is the lack of access to the credit market or debt funding, which kind of curtails that a little bit and creates some issues. With getting that in place, I think then we'll be fully sustainable and have full cost recovery at that point. So that's one of the shortcomings of our governance model. But having a few more expert on the board, I think in the new corporation that we're proposing would also help. and just the distance to remove a little bit of the politics, but it's worked well for us. So, but having those two things addressed, I think will put us on a good foot forward for the future.
Very good. Okay, thanks for those remarks, Rodney. Greg, your thoughts on pros and cons? Okay, just skip over Greg as well then for the moment. And Carl Y, I think you talked a little bit about the First Nations Water Authority advantages, but any driving factors or major factors you would like to draw attention to?
Yeah, certainly key coming out of the gate here with our model in terms of sustainability is really an opportunity to increase the level of service to different First Nation communities, and also to be consistent across the region. There's quite a disparity between First Nation communities today, so we hope to bring all up to a standard level of service. And as an example of that, right now we're working on an asset management plan for all the participating communities and a SCADA master plan. You can, any of you on the, I guess in the audience that understand operations will certainly appreciate the need for a common platform for remote operations. So those are kind of things that a regional utility can bring to bear versus an individual community might not have the resources to do it. There will be certainly economies of scale. Hard for a small utility to do it all on their own, but you bring together a critical mass, and we think we can do things good together and build more capacity really within First Nations. Obviously, we'll have a stronger voice, we think, one voice with negotiations with Ottawa, which, in the end, they're going to fund this utility. So that is a key. So instead of giving it to, 14 individual communities right now, or 15, they will turn those funds directly over to the Water Authority. In terms of some cons, well, obviously, currently right now, as I mentioned, we're first out of the gate on this type of a model. And one of the things that's lacking, to a certain extent at a federal level is policy and regulatory frameworks for First Nations. And that was what the Auditor General pointed out a long time ago, the fact that there's no kind of national framework for a lot of this to take place. So we're hoping that we can work with the federal government to establish those frameworks. And, our vision actually is, to get it to work in Atlantic Canada such that we can rinse and repeat and hopefully do it across the country. But that is a big con right now, is working to establish those governance frameworks. Right now, we need 3 regulators. We've got one established, Environment Canada, for wastewater. We need a regulator for drinking water, and we need a business regulator. And that was a common theme you'll see throughout our presentations today, where utilities are doing well. They've got that regulator at arm's length as well that looks over their shoulder on their business and rate approvals and those types of things.
Okay, thanks very much. Just want to check if George or Greg can chime in. No? Okay. Perhaps we'll go to one of the questions which came from the floor. Okay. And please, any of the panel members, okay.
Hey, Carl, this is Greg.
Okay. I can hear you, Greg. Can you hear us? No. Okay, well, perhaps we'll just move on. A bit of an audio-visual issue there, obviously. Common in these webinars. So any of the panel members who would like to comment on this, but I think it's how are growth, this is from Nancy Kudasek out of Waterloo, and how are growth-related capital projects financed? And I think the premise of Nancy's comment there is, how does growth pay for growth? So perhaps I could ask, we've got George here. Okay, so perhaps I can ask you to comment on that, and then perhaps some comments about the pros and cons of your governance model, George.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll start with, with the Municipal Services Corporation, debt financing is off the but we still receive development charges through the town for growth. So growth is paid for by development charges for all new growth, and subsequently maintenance and replacement of that original growth is paid for by existing rates. So just the same as it does with the municipal model. The other benefit of Municipal Services Corporation, it provides less liability to council because there's a board of directors. So the board of directors takes on some liability and helps shields the councillors from liability of the corporation. Also, by having the utility assets separated from municipal assets, it also helps with future mergers or amalgamations, because that process has already been done before. The assets are already evaluated, they're well depreciated, well defined. And because of the separation we have with the corporation and the municipality, there's the separation helps to inhibit taxpayer cross-subsidization towards the water and wastewater users. And anyway, as a negative, some of the employees indicated that, you know, they felt that they're now part of a small corporation and they're not part of the larger municipal town corporation as they were before. So they're feeling a little isolated.
Okay, thanks very much for those comments, George. I just want to see if we got Greg back on the line at all.
Trying.
Okay.
Can you hear me,
We can hear
Carl?
you, Greg.
Can you hear me, Carl?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, just let's see. I don't know what's. Try one more time here.
I think just maybe proceed with sound, Greg.
Okay.
Seems to be trouble-free.
Okay. Do you have me?
Yeah.
There we go. Sorry, technical difficulties. So, you know, perspective then on sustainable, where we are, pros and cons. Certainly, our journey on full cost recovery, we're really heading in the right place. A couple of things that are unique, our flexibility on funding and financing really helps us. In Manitoba, for sure, because we're part of the Cooperative Act, the Municipal Act, it gets a chance to get into things like bankers acceptance, interest rate swaps, and some pretty sophisticated type of financing, and allows us to really get some pretty super low rates. So we're paying down our debt very quickly with the current low rates that are there. Some of the rates you see with if you were to have a personal open mortgage, I'm not allowed to say what our numbers are with CIBC, but they're pretty amazing. And so some of that financing, so that whole thing about the model and our self-financing is a wonderful thing. Con perspective on our point of view is that we have to plan a lot. Because we do this 5-year public utilities approval. And so we really have to figure out what the thing is going to look like in the future and make sure we do a super good job of planning, because when we figure out our financing, we do it in 5-year blocks. And so for us, that's the flip side. Back to you, Carl.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Well, I see Robert's popped up here, so.
Hey, I'm just going to cut in just for a minute. Now, don't anybody go away. We've come to the end of an hour and a half. So formally, we're going to end our session just as if we were at a conference. But of course, like at a conference, everybody mingles and hangs around. And if we're got nowhere rushing to go, we stay and we'll keep talking. And we've got this wonderful panel. And so if you've got time, hang around. We've got our speakers booked for another half an hour. And if you're able, stay, and we're going to keep the recording going and continue this discussion. I see a great question from Francois in Calgary about, other than financial, what other things does a governance model affect? And that would include, you know, the next question Carl's got lined up is around public relations and communications, and so we're going to get into that. So please do stay. But if you got to go, it's 2. I will thank our sponsors, Hatch, for years of support, not just today, but years. Thank you very much, Hatch, for your support today. Thank you, Carl Bottomede, for your work today and your work leading our utility leadership group. And all the speakers today, if I don't get a chance at the end, I thank you all for your contributions today. Really fascinating. Of course, this is a communications event. I'm the mouthpiece, but the real leader that you don't see is Kara Parisienne. Kara is my communications manager and is the real brain behind what goes on here at CWWA, especially when it comes to conferences and webinars and all that we do. So thank you, Kara, for putting all this together. And the team of and Bernie, thanks for your support here. That's it. I hope you like this webinar. Hope you go back and sign up for the whole series that goes to the end of February and wraps up February 24th. Carl, back to you. Let's chat going.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks for those remarks, Robert, and thanks for the leadership of and your team. Okay, to put on this session, and the series, and I'm sure it's going to be very, very interesting going forward. So, yeah, as Robert touched upon, we'll just continue here. If everybody can stick around, that'd be fantastic. As Robert mentioned, there was a question about other sustainability dimensions that are influenced by the governance model, which does tie into one of the questions we did have lined up for our presenters, and they can each spend a minute on, if that would be okay. And that is, what role does the governance model play in relations with the public perception of accountability, ownership, partnership, etc., so that the utility gets the support, okay, that it needs to make the appropriate decisions. So I'll just throw it open to our presenters here as to who may want to answer that question first. Or perhaps I'll pick somebody. So, there we are. Ted's up first. Okay.
Thank you, yeah, just briefly to that that follow-up question you had there. Again, I'm just referring to our commission model with the commission we have and the model that we have there. The commission has really owned the issues and the outcomes with respect to the water utility. The chair of the commission really is a more public-facing spokesperson for the commission and the service, particularly on political issues and decisions of the commission, which is quite different than our advisory committees, which really operate behind the scenes and really tend to take less of a public profile. So we have that benefit. It works really well with our Regional Water Supply Commission and the governance model there. I just also want to go back very briefly to follow up on the comment and the question that Nancy had, and good to hear your name, Nancy. The issue around growth paying for growth, we don't have all the answers either, although we do have development cost charge programs to really fund the growth-related infrastructure. What we find, particularly in these growth periods, that the DCCs will pay for the initial capital and the initial construction, but of course the operating costs associated with that growth-related capital really fall to the customers, and that is turning out to be quite a problem here as large developments are occurring. That the initial capital that's funded through DCCs may not actually generate income through utility rates for, say, over 10 years while the larger subdivisions are built out. And so we're trying to look at ways of addressing that ongoing operating cost burden related to growth-related infrastructure, which are funded through DCCs. So just a comment there. If anybody has any solution there to deal with the operating costs associated with development cost charge infrastructure, we'd love to hear about it. So thanks, Carl.
Okay. No, thanks for those comments, Ted. Sounds like potentially the subject for another webinar. Okay. So George, perhaps, or see Rodney's popped up here. So you're on, Rodney.
You can go to George first. That's fine.
Okay, if George is there, we'll go with George. Okay, if not, we'll stick with Rodney. Perhaps I'll ask you to go first, Rodney, and then George can get up to the plate. Okay, so how's it been the public perception of your potential change, okay, to utility corporation?
Well, before we get there, Carl, I just wanted to say it's a little. So public perception is very key, and the issue that I've had. So when I started at Union Water, I would say in 2011, I had never heard of Union Water before that. and I've lived in this area for 20 some years. So that was an issue in itself. There was no website, there was nothing. So basically it was a utility that operated in the background, and everybody assumed that the water, which comes from their municipality, but they assumed that, Leamington had its own water treatment system, Kingsville. So most people weren't really aware of how things operated. So that doesn't work very well, because when things go wrong, it's like, who's responsible? So basically one of the first things that we did was leverage what we had on the board, which our board included, 12 councilors at the time, and included, 2 mayors, a couple deputy mayors. And so basically leveraging that to basically reach out to the public and say, we're here. We created a website, Facebook page, trying to reach out, basically showing that, we are separate from the municipalities, and we all solely focus on water. So kind of create that whole transparency, and going back to the public that if you need to deal with, water quality issues, water related issues, this is where you go to. So having that focus on there. So that's been very helpful, and it's worked for us, because now we definitely are an entity in the public's eye. And we actually, for our 4 municipal partners, we've now become like a call center. So if any problems happen at night, they call us, or during the weekend. So that's where we come from. So I think that's very, it's needed, it's required, and it was a good thing to do. As far as the new corporation, that's been a challenge, because our politicians are on board in regards to doing this, and they've been really pushing it. But there's still some things that we have to deal with with the 4 municipalities on how to address this, because the way the system was created back in the day is who paid for what, how much everybody paid. So we got to sort all those little details and background before we transfer the assets. And there's always, for the first few years that we presented it, there was concerns about, well, we're not going to be in control anymore. Somebody else is going to be in control. And but that works, that we've addressed those ideas and concerns. So we're really hoping that we're there right now, and that we're going to get to this model and at the end of this year to the corporation, just to address the major issues, which is I presented a capital program for the next 10 years to the board. That's about $70 million, which for small area is a lot of money for 75,000 people. It's a lot of money that we're looking at putting in, and so we have to leverage basically the municipalities to get that debt funding for us, and that creates issues for them, because then it reduces their borrowing capacity for the projects they want to do. So if we separate into a corporation where we can keep those debts on our books and get the debts on our own, then it would address those issues. So I think there's been a lot of support on that for that side, and if we can get there to address those issues. And I think that's it from my end. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Thanks very much. Okay, who else would like to chime in on this subject? Greg?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about it. For us, a couple of things that really have been helpful. The ownership by the 14 municipalities. Someone once said to me, how do you get 14 municipalities all to work together? And so the cooperative model has been very good for us, because the fact that people don't put their money in, so they don't have to contribute a lot, but yet they still help out because they hold the debt on their books at the end. And so that way we do things seems to have worked really well for us. The other thing is, we're a wholesaler of water, but then we have the retail operations at the municipal level. And there's a lot of cooperation and back and forth with them too. Sometimes we'll work with them to use some of their reservoir space, or they'll use some of our reservoir space, or we'll help on outages, or we'll feed each other back and forth for other customers. So there's an awful lot of cooperation with the model that we use there. And so for us, it's been very good. As I said before, our big thing is, because of the 5-year blocks and planning, we have to make sure that we figure all the things out in advance and make sure that we're doing a good job. And this is where the communication really comes in with the utilities, and making sure we understand what their growth projections are, when are they going to need more water, so that we can get ourselves in a place to be able to wholesale the water to them that they need. Back to you, Carl. This maybe the other Carl's on.
It looks like it. So over to Carl Yates.
Yeah, I just quickly chime in on a couple of points with regard to public perceptions on accountability. And that, to speak directly to liability of chiefs and council, a lot of concern with them right now that they're first up if there's issues that go wrong. So from perception of accountability, there's no question that they would like to not be, directly in that line of sight. Also, what will be different with our governance model is the utility will try to respond directly to customers' concerns. So today, all those calls go directly to council and the chief if there's issues. So we want to, over time, make sure we get those calls and relieve, the chief and council of that obligation. So I think that's a big positive in terms of relationship with the public. There goes Jack Russell. Just one second.
Carl did actually warn us about that could happen sometime during this webinar. So
I warned a few of my colleagues that could happen today, that the Jack Russell would go off. And right now, I'll let you know that the kids are coming back from school and getting off the bus. So the Jack Russells keep them from our property rather well. All right. So just, I guess, another quick comment with regard to accountability. And is one of the things we're going to have to work through, as I already mentioned, is, not having that kind of strong business regulation that we're going to need. I think that's a piece of accountability we need to work out, because that is critical to make sure that we are good stewards of financial resources. So with that, I'll allow anybody else to chime in.
Okay, very good. No, good points, everybody. So I'll just check if George is back online at all. No. Okay. Okay. Well, we've got one other question here, but still open to receiving other questions from on the Q&A chat line here. But the last question that I've got personally, okay, is that obviously we're providing water services. So George is back on. So perhaps George, I'll just ask you to comment on those last few questions, and then I'll ask my last question.
Sure, thanks, Carl. Sorry, it's taking time to get on and off of the camera. Anyway, interesting thing, Carl, is that with the Municipal Services Corporation, this corporation is able to provide dividends to the municipality, similar to what FCOR does with the. So, but at this point in time, with the huge growth on the horizon, in-services is taking its retained earnings and flowing it back into the company for asset. And another benefit of the Municipal Services Corporation is that it provides a degree of separation, because the municipality may have a rates-driven agenda, in which case the budget of a separate company can be focused on operational needs and not specifically on how much money we can get through rates. So it provides a certain degree of separation, allowing the corporation to build the infrastructure that's required, not being inhibited by cost restrictions. So that's it for me. Thanks, Carl.
One question I do have, George, before you just sign off there is, was when you moved to the corporation model, okay, was there any concern from the public, obviously, or misperception, if I could put it that way, is that, now our water and wastewater systems and assets are going to be privately owned rather than publicly owned? Was there that misconception that you had to deal with as you moved towards that model?
We had to do public consultations, and as a requirement to establish a municipal services corporation, a business plan has to be done in justification that the entity itself is used to replace something that the municipality can do or already does. So the public perception basically said, or is basically focused on the fact that it's a separate corporation, but the corporation is municipally owned, so it's still virtually a municipal corporation. So there wasn't any main issues during the time of incorporation, Carl.
Yeah, I see. Okay, very good. Thanks very much. Okay, so last question I've got, okay, for our panelists is obviously utilities, as utilities we're talking about here, core business is providing safe drinking water and treating wastewater. Okay, but there's other municipal responsibilities and roles, okay, which feed into that, whether it be health, the continuity of services, okay, to businesses, residents, your financial. Did you find that your governance model either has benefits or challenges in interacting with those other levels of, I will say other levels of government, those other roles, okay, municipal government, provincial government, and, you know, in the First Nations case, for federal government as well? So I'll just throw that open to the presenters for anybody who'd like to answer. Okay, Greg's up first. We have Greg. There he is. He's back in. Oh, can't hear you, Greg. You're on mute, I think.
Okay. So I guess one of the unique things in trying to manage multiple issues, whether it be health, service, financial, with our particular governance model, you know, the board is extremely supportive, but the board delegates a lot of responsibility to the CEO role. And I alluded to that earlier. It's similar in some ways. I've worked in the for-profit world for a while, and it was very similar in terms of funding. The board just said to me, figure it out and get the money somewhere. So it's very much, if you sign on to this role, then you have to go do it. They're supportive of doing all kinds of things. Heaven knows to go with me on things like bankers acceptance and interest rate swaps, which is pretty upfront and pretty new ways of financing. People are extremely supportive, but they really expect that I'm going to work with my leadership team to deliver the results for the utility. Another thing we're working on, and I see a question someone did in the Q&A there, saying, when you talked about regulatory and financial, but what are the other sustainable things? One of the other things that the board has really supported me on is my quest for source water, good quality source water, reliable source water, and water availability for the future. And I think it's a really important thing that utilities look at, whether it be how do you protect the existing. I mentioned at the start of my presentation that we had the Red River as a source water, and sometimes it can get low, sometimes it floods half of Manitoba. So it goes all over, and then we have a smaller lake with a small river that's somewhat restricted. And we're currently doing quite a bit of work with the province of Manitoba. They've just implemented a development planning process for a water strategy for the province. And it may dovetail in some ways with the work that the federal government's doing with the new Canadian Water Agency. And so I would suggest that for sustainable water or utilities, one of the things that we all have to pay attention to is the quality of the source water, that we will be able to continue to deliver it. And if in fact we need more water, where are we going to get it? So Carl, that would be my thoughts. And I think it's really an important additional element to regulatory and financial for sustainable utility.
Very good. Thanks very much, Greg. Good point. Any of our other panel would like to join in? Okay.
Yeah, I can touch base here from a First Nations perspective on a couple of things that we've been following closely, and we're going to have to work, close with communities in the future here with our governance model in particular when we're looking at growth in the communities. And today, actually, nobody's really watching that closely, and that is a bit of an issue. Nobody's looking long term to see if all of a sudden somebody walks in the community, wants to establish a business, does the water and wastewater, system have capacity, period. So that is something that this model will bring, that takes a broader approach than just, delivering the service day to day, is looking out long term for that growth potential for the First Nation communities. So the utility plans, for instance, to do an integrated resource plan, probably within the first 3 years of operation, get going on that, which is a 25-year outlook. So then, make sure that growth is really captured. Also, we'll be working closely with health branches of ISC, the First Nations Inuit and Health Branch in particular. They're set up to to pay particular focus on public health outcomes, which obviously drinking water and public sanitation are key. And each community in Atlantic Canada has its First Nations health branch, many of them right within the community. So we certainly can see us establishing relationship with them to make sure that we take a holistic and integrated approach, to public health outcomes. So I think that's going to be, a positive aspect for our utility.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Al. Okay, Rodney, Ted, or George, would you like to comment?
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Yeah, so we can add a little bit. I mean, although I keep bringing back the story that we're looking to move to a municipal services corporation, that's to address certain things that we can't do right now. I mean, in regards to having a legal status under a municipal act and doing some of the things that George identified, right? So we can get the credit on our own and certain things like that. But the current model that we have right now, which is more of a regional model, where we service 4 municipalities, it still works well in other aspects where we're able to do certain things that individually they might not be able to do. So for example, like Greg mentioned, source protection. So Lake Erie, where we're at, is on the Western Basin. We're very subject to large algal blooms, which creates issues. So, each small individual municipality might not be able to do certain things that we can do as a larger entity, which is we're doing research projects right now with various universities, University of Toronto, Queen's University. We got one going with Great Lakes Institute of Environmental Research in Windsor, where we're installing we're moving towards installing a monitoring network in Lake Erie on our side of the lake. They have something on the southern side in the U.S., but just to monitor algal blooms coming in, and it's going to include number of buoys and a whole website, and it's going to include a bunch of partners, including NOAA, so on the U.S. side. So these are things that might not be able to get done on a smaller municipal side because they just wouldn't have the capabilities of doing it. And so being more of a regional scale, working together, we can achieve that. And it also allows us to achieve things that, again, on the research side, and put more funding into these health-based predictive models and predictive networks and things that are mostly focused on health. So we can do that in a way that might not be achievable for smaller municipalities. So I think that governance model allows that. And whether we structure into a municipal service corporation doesn't really change that whole regional kind of scale utility where we can achieve a lot more together instead of everybody trying to work individually where that might not be achievable. So that's one example where I think it works well for us.
Yeah. Thanks, Rodney.
With when working with our health units and stuff, we can basically approach them as a more unified entity, which helps us get certain things done with regulators as well. That might not work as well if you're just a smaller municipality. So.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, certainly. I think one of the common themes this afternoon, certainly that I've picked up on, is the benefits of economy of scale, okay, and the benefits of collaboration. So I think that is something that a number of you presenters have touched upon. So Ted or George, any responses to that question? If not, then perhaps what I'll do is I'll just ask if there's any final comments that any of our presenters would like to make. We're getting close to 3 o'clock here. And then perhaps after we've gone around with our presenters for any final remarks, I'll just ask Robert to close out the webinar. Unless I'll just do the rounds here, make sure that we're not missing anybody. But Ted, any closing remarks from yourself? Oh, Carl's jumped in. We're going in reverse order.
There we go. Yeah, no, just one thing I perhaps did not speak about more directly in terms of how we're going to be funded. We're not going to be funded through water rates. That's a very sensitive issue, certainly within First Nation culture. if we put meters on a service, it won't be certainly to charge people. It will be to manage the system. So our funding, is going to come from the federal government. And recently, we saw an announcement through Minister Mark Miller that they are actually going to increase their funding to First Nation communities. So that was certainly great to hear. For those of you who are not familiar, today, First Nation communities are funded 80% for their operations and maintenance budgets. But Minister Miller announced that funding will increase actually now to 100%. So that is certainly very positive news to First Nation communities, and helps us through that difficult conversation that we got to have and where to find the other 20%. So I just want to make sure people are aware of that is late breaking information as well to share. So that's my last final comment. Over to others.
Ed? Greg?
Yeah, I just thought I'd put a plug in for Carl, you and the rest of us on the Utilities Leadership Group, because as we're wrapping this up and talking about governance for sustainable future, some of the key things that are going to be spoken to on the document that the Utilities Group is working on that really relates to this. And so I'm just going to throw out some words: declining consumption, deteriorating infrastructure, climate change impact, changing dynamics, and water source problems, which are all things that will need to be dealt with the governance approach to ensure a sustainable utility. My closing comments.
Excellent point. Okay, thanks, Greg. So, Ted, Rodney, or George, any closing remarks from yourselves?
No, nothing further, Carl, from Ted, and thank you for moderating the session today.
Yeah. I'd just like to thank all our speakers. I think it's been a very interesting cross-section of utilities. I think there's a lot of food for thought there, and hopefully it's been of interest and of use to the audience, and given them something to think about and perhaps to talk with their various municipalities and boards, etc., in terms of what model may fit their best needs, their mandate. So, George, I see you popped up back, so any closing remarks?
Anyway, I echo the previous comments and thanking you and your team for moderating and presenting this conference. As far as my final comments go, what we're experienced with the Municipal Services Corporation is the fact that we are smaller and more nimble now than we were as being a department of the municipality. So we're not as encumbered with purchasing policies, legal issues. We have a board of 5 instead of council of nine. So we have the ability to do things a lot more quickly, which leads into environmental, financial, and other issues that we have the ability to do things that the municipality will take much longer. So anyway, that's it for me. Thank you, and best regards.
Okay, thank you very much, George. Just give Rodney a chance to make any final remarks. If Rodney, you're okay, it's over to you, Rob, to close things out.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I just appreciate you taking the leadership on putting this together and basically moderating this. And I think it was a great event. And I hope to see quite a few more of these. And I think it's good to share this subject. Governance. I keep thinking, my whole point is what I'm doing here and what I'm hoping to share with everybody when I go to conferences and we talk about sustainability and governance models is that trying to establish something that leave it better than it is right now, because for our future, and that we need the people coming in, our young staff coming in. They're very data oriented. They want they really love to have everything together, and we need to basically create a sustainable model for them to basically take on as we move in the future. And I'll say this, and hopefully I don't offend anybody, but I think taking the water, wastewater out of municipal departments and putting it in arm's length, whether corporations or co-ops or whatever, I think that's the way to go. because then we can focus on a service that is basically needed to address the challenges of the future, whether it be climate change or decreasing water demand. I think that's definitely the future we need to look at, and that's where I'm hoping to get to, and I hope other people start seeing that as well. So thank you very much, and that's my comments.
Oh, great. Thanks very much, Rodney. Thanks very much to all our panelists for sharing their knowledge and expertise, okay, today. Thanks to Robert for you and your team for putting this all together. I'll just pass it over to you for any closing remarks.
I think everybody said what had to be said to wrap it up. I appreciate everybody saying that. Get back to work. Get to sign your membership. We really need you. So thanks again, Carl, and the whole team. Wonderful. Oh, and we will get slides out if all the presenters are okay with us sharing the slide deck. We'll get those out this week. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, and we have another webinar next week, correct?
Every Wednesday for the next 2 months.
Okay, same bat time, same bat channel. Okay,
Okay.
very good. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good day.